They were trapped in a ghastly swamp, surrounded by the undead, but the true descent into insanity wasn't just the environment around them, but rather the relentless, gnawing pressure of survival. For them, Tank Dempsey, the hardened Marine, Nikolai Belinski, the cynical and vodka-soaked Red Army soldier, Takeo Masaki, the honorable samurai caught in dishonorable circumstances, and Edward Richtofen, the brilliant yet fractured scientist. Shi No Numa was not just a location, but rather a mirror reflecting the unraveling of their minds. Consider Dempsey, the ever-present bravado, the constant stream of one-liners. But is it truly confidence, or just a desperate shield against the encroaching terror? Imagine the weight of each fallen comrade, the endless cycle of violence chipping away at the gung-ho exterior, revealing the raw, primal fear beneath. Each swing of his knife, each spray of bullets, a futile attempt to silence the screams that echoed not just from the undead, but from the battlefield of his own memories. Then there's Nikolai, the survivor hardened by war and numbed by vodka. The cynicism, the dark humor, were they coping mechanisms against the unbearable reality? Each swig from the bottle a temporary escape from the horrors that surrounded him, the ghosts of his past mingling with the present nightmare. Did he even know what he was fighting for anymore, beyond the next fleeting moment of survival? For Takeo, honor was a guiding principle, a rigid framework in a world descending into utter chaos. But how does one maintain honor amid the dishonorable dead? The samurai, trained for noble combat, found himself facing an enemy devoid of humanity, a relentless tide that knew no code. The weight of his failures, the stain on his family name. Did the endless fight offer a chance for redemption, or was it just another layer of shame in this waking nightmare? And finally, Dr. Richtofen, the architect of so much of this madness, found himself trapped within its confines. The swamp of death, a place of broken souls, became a twisted reflection of his own fractured psyche. Were the whispers he heard the ravings of the insane, or the echoes of his own dark experiments? The line between genius and madness blurred, each scientific breakthrough stained with the blood of the reanimated, each cackling laugh tinged with a growing hysteria. In the relentless nightmare of Call of Duty Zombies, survival is more than just firepower and quick reflexes. It's a brutal test of the human psyche, a descent into the abyss where the familiar rules of reality shatter. Faced with unending hordes and unimaginable horrors, the four figures at the heart of the saga, the brash marine, the jaded soldier, the stoic samurai, and the fractured scientist, each grapple with the encroaching darkness in their own unique way. Tonight, we delve into the breaking minds behind the guns. This is Shi No Numa, the Swamp of Death, wherein tonight we explore the mind as the ultimate and most vulnerable casualty. Let us begin our exploration with the seemingly most resilient of the four, the hardened Marine, Tank Dempsey. On the surface, he's the embodiment of the gung-ho American soldier, loud, confident, and always ready with a wisecrack, even as hordes of the undead claw at his barricades. But beneath this seemingly unwavering bravado lies a complex psychological defense. Dempsey's constant humor, his tendency to downplay the horrific reality around him, can be understood through the psychological lens of reaction formation. This is a defense mechanism where the unconscious mind acts in a way that is the extreme opposite of how it truly feels. His over-the-top confidence and aggression could be a way to mask a deep and perhaps overwhelming anxiety stemming from both the immediate threat around him and the likely trauma of his military past. Reaction formation is everywhere in our lives. Imagine someone walking through a dark and unsettling graveyard at night. They might start whistling loudly or even start singing a song. This outward display of nonchalance isn't because they're truly unafraid, it's often a way to mask their inner fear and anxiety. The act of whistling or singing loudly is the opposite of how they actually feel, scared and vulnerable. Similarly, Dempsey's constant jokes and over-the-top bravado in the face of the horrific zombie apocalypse could be his way of whistling past the graveyard. He's projecting an image of fearlessness to try and control his own internal terror, and perhaps even to reassure his companions and himself in an incredibly frightening situation. Furthermore, Dempsey's constant stream of jokes and dismissive remarks about the undead might also be a form of repression. Think about a time you did something really embarrassing. Your mind probably tries to push that memory away, right? You actively try not to dwell on it, change the subject when it comes up, and generally avoid letting it surface in your thoughts. Repression is a more intense and unconscious version of that. For Dempsey, the horrific things he's seen and experienced in the zombie apocalypse, the brutal deaths, the overwhelming numbers, and the sheer impossibility of it all, are like those intensely embarrassing or traumatic memories. His mind might be continually working to push those overwhelming thoughts and feelings down, out of his conscious awareness, so that he can keep functioning. He's actively trying not to think about that terrible thing, but on a much larger and more impactful scale. By focusing on humor and refusing to acknowledge the true terror of their situation, he could be unconsciously pushing down the overwhelming anxiety and the potential for psychological breakdown. It's a way for him to maintain a semblance of control in a world spiraling into utter chaos, even if that control is merely just an illusion woven through sarcasm and bravado. Consider his frequent taunts aimed at the zombies. While seemingly aggressive, these could also be a way to psychologically distance himself from the enemy, dehumanizing them further to make the act of killing them more palatable. It's a way to maintain his identity as a soldier, facing an enemy he can understand, even when that enemy defies all logic and reason. The laughter, the taunts, the unwavering confidence. For Dempsey, these might be the only weapons he has left against the encroaching darkness within his own mind. But the question remains, can even the most hardened exterior withstand the relentless onslaught of the undead and the psychological toll it exacts, or will the cracks in Dempsey's bravado eventually widen, revealing the vulnerable human beneath the Marine's tough facade? The bravado, the jokes, they are a shield, yes, but a shield against what? The immediate terror of the undead, undoubtedly, but perhaps also against a deeper void, a silence in the chambers of his own past. Like a mind struggling to protect itself from unimaginable trauma, their memories, fractured, incomplete, or entirely absent due to the insidious effects of Element 115, leave a gaping wound. The three characters, apart from Richtofen, all exhibit amnesia as a result of the continual Element 115 experimentation performed on them at the hands of Group 935 and Dr. Richtofen. For Dempsey, his constant need to assert himself, to project an image of unwavering strength, could be, in part, a subconscious attempt to fill that void, to create a solid identity, when his true history remains shrouded in a chemically induced fog. Remember that time in the Pacific, you might ask him. He might bark mid-slaughter, only to trail off, a flicker of confusion crossing his features. You cannot even really remember much from the Pacific, the details lost in a fog, not of battle, but of something far more insidious. That ingrained confidence, that unwavering belief in his own abilities, is it entirely his own, or is it just a construct built upon a foundation of half-remembered glories, a desperate attempt to define a self when so much has been stolen? Dempsey's character exhibits several potential indicators of post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, a mental condition triggered by experiencing or witnessing a terrifying event. While his specific traumatic experiences within the zombie's narrative are often shrouded in the fog of memory loss, his intense reactions, hypervigilance, and recurring behavioral patterns align with key symptoms of PTSD. The constant exposure to life-threatening situations, the relentless violence, and the inability to truly escape the horror of the undead apocalypse create a fertile ground for the development of PTSD. His often aggressive outbursts and his hair-trigger responses to perceived threats could be manifestations of hyperarousal, common symptom of PTSD where the individual is in a persistent state of heightened alertness and easily startled. His difficulty relaxing, his irritability, his exaggerated startle responses to sudden noises or movements within the game environment could all point toward an overactive stress response system. This raises a question though. If the mind's explicit memories have been wiped by Element 115, can the effects of trauma, such as those seen in PTSD, still persist? The scientific understanding of trauma and memory suggests a compelling answer. Yes, trauma can indeed leave lasting imprints on the brain and body, even in the absence of conscious declarative memories. While we may not consciously recall the specific traumatic events, the emotional and physiological responses associated with that trauma can become deeply ingrained. The amygdala is a part of the brain that processes fear and anxiety, and it can become hyperactive in PTSD, leading to a heightened state of reactivity as discussed. The body's stress response system can be chronically dysregulated, leading to persistent anxiety, sleep disturbances, and exaggerated startle responses. These are not necessarily tied to the conscious recall of a specific event, but rather represent a sensitization of the nervous system to perceived threats. Think of it this way, even if you don't remember touching a hot stove as a child, the fear response, the flinching, the hesitation, might still be present when you approach a heat source in the present. The body and the emotional centers of the brain can retain implicit memories, unconscious memories of feelings, sensations, and behavioral responses, even when the explicit narrative of the event is lost. In Dempsey's case, even if he doesn't have clear chronological memories of specific battles or traumatic encounters, the repeated exposure to extreme danger and violence in his past could have hardwired a state of hypervigilance and aggression into his very own nervous system. The emotional residue of those experiences, the ingrained fear responses, can manifest as PTSD-like symptoms, even without the conscious recollection of these triggering events. The body, in a very real sense, remembers the trauma, even when the mind cannot fully access that narrative. Furthermore, the fragmented memories and the underlying sense of unease that occasionally peers through his tough exterior might represent intrusive thoughts or flashbacks, where elements of past trauma resurface unexpectedly, causing intense distress. While the exact nature of these memories is unclear due to the amnesia, the psychological impact, the sense of being trapped in a cycle of fear and reliving traumatic memories, is consistent with PTSD. Dempsey's attempt to control his environment through force and his reliance on familiar combat tactics could also be understood as safety behaviors, strategies developed to cope with the overwhelming anxiety and lack of control associated with PTSD. His humor, as previously discussed, might serve not only as repression but also as a way to distance himself from the emotional weight of the trauma he has endured and continues to endure. Recognizing these potential signs allows us to view Dempsey's often stereotypical tough guy persona through a more complex and potentially even sad or disturbing lens, highlighting the unseen psychological wounds of a soldier trapped in an unending war against death itself. Where Dempsey attempts to control his inner turmoil through outward force, Nikolai Belinski, however, turns inward, seeking refuge from the relentless horror in the familiar comfort of the bottle. Another round, another reason to drink, but what is it he truly drowning? The immediate horrors, yes, but also the ghosts of wives he can barely picture, battles fought in a war he struggles to fully recall. Is the vodka merely a numbing agent for the present, or also a way to silence the unsettling void where his history should be? Nikolai's pervasive reliance on vodka is more than just a character quirk. It's a stark representation of avoidance coping, a psychological strategy where individuals attempt to minimize stress by avoiding the source of the stress or the feelings associated with it. Think about a stack of overdue bills sitting on your desk. You know you need to deal with them, but the thought of facing the amounts, the potential late fees, and the stress of figuring out how to pay them is overwhelming. So, you avoid looking at them. You might watch TV, play a game, or do anything else to distract yourself from the problem. Things that feel nice. Nikolai's reliance on vodka is a similar, albeit much more extreme, form of avoidance. The overwhelming horror of the zombie apocalypse, the trauma of his forgotten past, and the constant threat are his overdue bills, so to speak. He turns to alcohol to numb those feelings and avoid confronting the unbearable reality, even though it doesn't actually solve the underlying problems and just instead creates new ones. In his case, the trauma of war, the loss of his family, however he remembers it, and the apocalyptic reality he faces now are likely immense psychological burdens. Alcohol acts as a central nervous system depressant, literally numbing emotional pain and temporarily reducing anxiety. To truly understand Nikolai is to grapple with the crushing reality of substance dependence. Addiction is not just a moral feeling, but a hijacking of the brain's reward pathways. Substances like alcohol flood the brain with dopamine, creating an intense feeling of pleasure and reinforcement. This powerful reward system makes the brain learn that the substance is essential for well-being, overriding natural reward systems. Addiction does not just creep up on you. You don't ever see it coming. By the time you realize, addiction has already hijacked your brain. Trying to quit is easier in stage 1, but what happens when you only realize you're addicted at stage 10? The initial pleasure experienced by users, much like the intense euphoria described by individuals using opioids, creates a potent memory link. The brain associates the substance with profound relief and pleasure, making it incredibly difficult to resist, especially when faced with stress or negative emotions. A lot of these cravings are completely subconscious. Thoughts like, oh, one more couldn't hurt. Maybe you wouldn't even have that thought. Maybe your body just goes to the bottle or the drug in question, and you don't even think twice about it. Furthermore, the development of tolerance means the brain adapts to the substance, requiring ever-increasing amounts to achieve the same effect. When the substance is removed, the brain experiences a thing called withdrawal, a cascade of unpleasant and often severe physical and psychological symptoms. For substances like heroin, the initial rush of using is often described as an intense, all-encompassing pleasure, a feeling of warmth and euphoria that can momentarily obliterate all pain and distress. It's a euphoria like none other, as has been described by so many users. This powerful reward creates an incredibly strong association in the brain. However, the withdrawal from opioids like heroin is notoriously brutal. Users often report excruciating muscle and bone pain, severe nausea and vomiting, intense anxiety, insomnia, and a profound sense of despair and depression. This agonizing experience creates a desperate need to use the drug again, not even to feel that rush of pleasure, but simply just to escape the torment of withdrawal, thereby perpetuating a cycle of dependence that can be incredibly difficult to break free from. Alcohol, while legal and more socially accepted, also carries a significant risk of dependence and severe withdrawal. The initial effects of alcohol can include feelings of relaxation, euphoria, and social disinhibition, driven by its impact on neurotransmitter systems. However, with chronic use, tolerance develops, requiring larger amounts to achieve these effects. The hangover most people are familiar with, headache, nausea, fatigue, is a very mild form of withdrawal. In individuals with severe alcohol dependence, however, withdrawals can be life-threatening. Delirium tremens, for example, are a form of alcohol withdrawal that can involve severe hallucinations, seizures, confusion, and a dangerously elevated heart rate. This level of physical and psychological distress underscores the powerful physiological changes the brain undergoes with chronic alcohol use, highlighting that Nikolai's reliance on vodka is not just a simple choice, but a desperate attempt to manage a profound and potentially agonizing physical and psychological dependence. The cycle of brief relief, followed by the looming threat of crippling withdrawal, traps the individual, making escape incredibly challenging without comprehensive support and understanding. Compound on that the world around him and the lost past of his self, and it becomes hard to still see Nikolai as just a stereotypical and comical drunkard. The societal stigma surrounding addiction often exacerbates this cycle. Treating addicts with hostility, judgment, and blame only serves to isolate them further, pushing them into a corner where the very substance that has hijacked their brain becomes their sole perceived source of comfort and relief from the added emotional pain of social rejection. This would inevitably create a vicious feedback loop. reinforcing the addiction as a maladaptive coping mechanism against both internal distress and external hostility. Understanding the neurobiological and psychological underpinnings of addiction is crucial to lend empathy and adopt effective, science-based approaches to treatment and support, rather than perpetuating harmful and counterproductive stigma. In stark contrast to Nikolai's inward retreat into substance abuse, though, Takeo Masaki seeks solace and stability in the unwavering principles of an external code, the rigid tenets of the samurai. A warrior must face his fate with dignity. Takeo Masaki's unwavering adherence to the samurai code and his pronouncements on honor and duty illustrate the powerful human need for meaning-making in times of crisis. Psychological research has shown that finding a sense of purpose and meaning can be a crucial factor in resilience when facing trauma and adversity. Takeo's deeply ingrained belief system provides him with a framework for understanding and navigating the senseless chaos of the zombie apocalypse. His rigid adherence to samurai tradition offers a sense of control and predictability in a world that has become utterly unpredictable. Furthermore, in situations of extreme stress and loss of control, individuals may gravitate toward rigid belief systems as a way to restore order and certainty. This can be linked to the psychological concept of cognitive closure, which is the desire for a firm answer to a question and an aversion towards ambiguity. Takeo's unwavering faith in the samurai code provides him with clear guidelines for behavior and a sense of identity, even when his personal memories are fragmented. This adherence to an external structure offers a psychological anchor in a sea of uncertainty, a way to maintain a sense of self and purpose in the face of overwhelming chaos. To understand the profound significance of honor and duty for Takeo, it's important to briefly consider the historical context of the samurai and their unwavering loyalty. In feudal Japan, the emperor held a unique position, often viewed not merely as a political leader, but as a divine figure, a kind of descendant of the gods themselves. This deeply ingrained reverence shaped their entire samurai ethos, placing absolute loyalty to the emperor and the principles he represented as the highest virtue. This historical backdrop illuminates the very core of Takeo's being, making his adherence to honor and tradition not just a personal choice, but a fundamental aspect of his identity, a kind of lifeline in a world that has shattered all familiar structures. Takeo Masaki's unwavering adherence to the samurai code and his often spiritual pronouncements highlight a fundamental aspect of human condition: the aversion to ambiguity and the comfort found in certainty, especially in times of distress. In psychology, research consistently demonstrates that the human mind has a strong preference for clear answers and predictable patterns. Ambiguity, on the other hand, creates cognitive discomfort, a state of unease that our brains actively seek to resolve. Consider the human quest for origins and meaning. We as a species are driven to understand our place in the universe. When confronted with profound uncertainties, such as the origins of the first cell, which remains a complex area of scientific inquiry with hypotheses but no definitive observation, or the events before and the mechanisms of the Big Bang, a singularity whose true nature is still beyond our complete comprehension, the lack of definitive answers can be unsettling. While science provides frameworks and evidence-based theories for the what, the ultimate why and the how often remain elusive. The human mind, as we've discussed, dislikes this ambiguity. Intriguingly, our own lived experience as creators and inventors provides a readily accessible framework for understanding existence. We create objects, build structures, and design systems. It is a fundamental aspect of our intelligence and our interaction with the world around us. Therefore, the intuitive leap to the idea that just as we create, we too must have been created by a higher power or a divine architect is a cognitively accessible and, for many, emotionally comforting conclusion. Even without direct empirical evidence, this concept aligns with our own inherent understanding of cause and effect based on our own agency. It is a firm answer anchored in our biased perspectives as active creators with our own reality, making the suspension of disbelief and the embrace of faith a psychologically understandable and even appealing path to many, particularly when faced with the vast and often unsettling unknowns of the universe. While the existence of a deity remains a matter of faith and personal conviction and not one of scientific proof, the psychological comfort derived from such firm answers is undeniable. The human mind, faced with the vast unknowns of existence, often finds solace and stability in the certainty offered by belief, much like Takeo finds a steadfast anchor in the unwavering principles of his code amid the chaos of a world stripped of its familiar order. This is not to debate the validity of the belief, but to understand the psychological drive for certainty that can underlie it. This all makes it much harder to view Takeo as the boring character he is often seen as, even though he goes through struggles and deals with traumatic events in a way quite similar and relatable to many individuals. However, while Takeo seeks stability and comfort in tradition, the mind of Edward Richtofen appears to operate on an entirely different plane, a landscape as twisted and unpredictable as the undead these characters face. Edward Richtofen's detached, deranged, yet scientific approach to the zombie apocalypse and his relentless pursuit of knowledge and power exemplify the defense mechanism of intellectualization. For us, this might be like when a friend comes to us with a deeply emotional problem, such as a breakup, a loss, or a family issue. But instead of offering comfort or empathy, we immediately jump into problem-solving mode, dissecting the situation logically, analyzing the root causes, and suggesting practical solutions. While our intentions might be good, we'd be using our intellect to engage with the problem on a purely cognitive level, potentially avoiding or minimizing the emotional distress your friend's experiencing, and perhaps our own discomfort with strong emotions. Similarly, Richtofen often approaches the horrific reality of the zombies and the moral implications of his actions by immediately focusing on the scientific principles, the mechanics, the how it works, rather than the inherent suffering and terror. He's overanalyzing the problem of the undead to create a distance from the emotional weight of the apocalypse. By focusing on the objective and scientific aspects of the situation, Richtofen distances himself from the emotional horror and the ethical implications of his actions. He treats the undead and even his own companions as subjects of experimentation, allowing him to maintain a sense of control through intellectual mastery. However, Richtofen's extreme detachment, his apparent lack of empathy, and his grandiose ambitions could also hint at underlying neurological or psychological divergences. While not explicitly stated in the lore, his characteristics bear resemblance to certain personality traits associated with narcissistic personality traits, or even elements of psychopathy, which is a disorder characterized by a lack of empathy, manipulative tendencies, and a strong sense of self-importance. From a neurological perspective, these traits have been linked to literal differences in brain structure and function, particularly in areas related to emotional processing and social cognition. While his brilliance as a doctor is undeniable, the cold, calculating manner in which he pursues his goals suggests a profound disconnect from the emotional reality of the suffering he inflicts and witnesses, potentially stemming from an inherent difference in his neurological or psychological makeup. His relentless pursuit of power could be a manifestation of this, a desire to exert complete control over a world that reflects the internal chaos of his own mind. Richtofen presents even more complex psychological traits, however, ones that delve into maladaptive cognitive patterns. His eccentric behavior, his detachment from conventional social norms, his peculiar beliefs about the ether in Element 115, and his occasional tangential and bizarre pronouncements could align with schizotypal personality traits. This personality pattern is characterized by odd thinking and speech, unusual beliefs or magical thinking, and social anxiety. Richtofen's fascination with the occult, his belief in grand and often convoluted schemes, and his discomfort in close relationships resonate with these traits. Furthermore, Richtofen's cognitive processes appear to be significantly skewed by maladaptive cognitions, distorted or irrational thought patterns that lead to negative emotions and behaviors. His inflated sense of self-importance, his belief in his own intellectual superiority, and his tendency to rationalize even the most unethical experiments as necessary for the greater good are examples of cognitive distortions that allow him to maintain his worldview despite the chaos and suffering he creates. This grandiosity might also serve as a defense mechanism against underlying feelings of inadequacy or a need to justify his own often destructive actions. Finally, Richtofen's relentless pursuit of control over Element 115, the ether, and perhaps ultimately his own fractured mind could be a driving force rooted in deep-seated anxiety and a fear of being powerless. His experiments, his manipulations, and his constant striving for ultimate knowledge can be seen as an attempt to impose order on a chaotic and terrifying reality, both external and internal. The fragmented memories and the potential influence of the ether on his psyche might contribute to a fundamental instability, leading him to seek absolute control as a way to prevent further fragmentation or a complete descent into madness. His brilliance is yet again undeniable, but it is often overshadowed by a chilling detachment and a relentless ambition that suggests a mind grappling with profound internal conflicts and a desperate need to exert dominance over a world that mirrors the instability within his own self. It's crucial to remember that Richtofen was not a blank slate before his exposure to Element 115 and the whispers from the MPD. His documented history, even prior to the events of the zombie apocalypse, paints a disturbing picture. The moniker The Butcher, earned during his involvement in World War II, speaks volumes about a pre-existing capacity for cruelty, a detachment from human suffering, and a willingness to engage in horrific acts. This suggests a potential predisposition towards a lack of empathy and a disturbing fascination with the darker aspects of science and human nature. From a psychological perspective, certain personality traits and biases can indeed predispose individuals towards maladaptive behaviors and a skewed moral compass. Pre-existing tendencies toward narcissism, characterized by a grandiose sense of self-importance and a lack of empathy, or even subclinical psychopathic traits involving a disregard for the rights and feelings of others, can create a fertile ground for the development of more severe psychological disturbances under extreme circumstances. In Richtofen's case, his inherent intellectual arrogance and his apparent belief that his ends justify any means likely created a cognitive framework where ethical considerations were secondary to his scientific pursuits, even before the influence of alien elements and extra-dimensional entities. The voices from the MPD and the mutagenic effects of Element 115 didn't necessarily create his darker tendencies ex nihilo. Instead, they likely amplified and distorted pre-existing biases and predispositions, pushing him further down a path already paved with a chilling lack of moral restraint. The madness that consumed him wasn't a sudden external imposition, but rather a corruption and grotesque blossoming of seeds that were already present in his deeply flawed psyche. The MPD and Element 115 merely acted as catalysts, shattering what little connection to conventional morality might have remained and unleashing the full potential of a mind already inclined toward the macabre and the megalomaniacal. His pursuit of power, therefore, becomes not just a quest for control over the external world, but a manifestation of a deeply ingrained desire to dominate and reshape reality according to his own distorted vision, a vision that was likely taking shape long before the undead ever walked. This pre-existing inclination towards the macabre, this fertile ground of a flawed psyche, was then subjected to the chaotic influence of the MPD and the mutagenic properties of Element 115. The consequences were a profound fracturing of Richtofen's perception of reality, mirroring the devastating effects of schizophrenia. The in-game narrative frequently alludes to the voices that plague him, not mere thoughts, but seemingly external commands and whispers echoing within his own mind. The voices, they're so clear now, he'd exclaim, often mid-experiment, slaughter, or during moments of general intense stress. These auditory hallucinations, a hallmark of schizophrenia, blurred the lines between internal thought and external stimuli, creating a terrifying and isolating experience for the individual. But the MPD's influence wasn't solely auditory. Richtofen's increasingly bizarre and distorted worldview, his visions of the ether, and his elaborate nonsensical plans suggest the presence of visual hallucinations as well. The very fabric of his reality appears warped, colored by perceptions unseen by his companions. This combination of auditory and visual hallucinations, fueled by a mind already teetering on the edge and exacerbated by external forces, paints a picture strikingly similar to the lived experiences of individuals with schizophrenia, a constant struggle to discern what is real and what is a product of a disordered mind.
Now here's a story out of Chicago from last night. Two men posing as maintenance workers nearly made it out of the Quick Bite convenience store with the store's ATM machine.
Make a list. Make a longer list.
Entered the store, asked for
You are ungrateful.
You're a waste of space. A waste of our time.
They were going to take the machine back to their
Getting
shop
coffee now.
Don't drink it. Stupid. So stupid.
That smells awful. Don't drink that coffee.
When the clerk told the men he had called police, the pair took off and left the machine.
Why are you so worthless?
So Sky, tell us how this weekend's weather is turning
Weather.
out.
Something wrong.
You know what, Chuck? There's just no stopping the weekend weather. You hear that, worthless? Weather's coming to get
Something
you.
wrong. Weather.
And what are you gonna do about it, huh?
Something wrong. You have to stop it.
You're just gonna sit around with your stupid mouth open and do nothing?
You have to stop it. It's the weather. It's here for us.
Now he has to answer the door.
It's here for us.
As this brief simulation illustrates, the world as perceived by someone experiencing schizophrenia can be seen as a rather disorienting and terrifying landscape of distorted sights and intrusive sounds. For Richtofen, trapped within his own mind, amplified by the MPD and Element 115, this fractured reality becomes his constant companion, further eroding his grip on sanity and solidifying his descent into a unique and disturbing form of madness. When we play as Richtofen, we should be seeing the world through his own warped eyes. However, we do not. We can only think about what he sees the world as, and more disturbingly, what he thinks of it. And so, we return to the ghastly Shi No Numa, no longer simply a battleground against the undead, but a vivid stage for the unfolding dramas within the minds of these four tormented souls. We've seen how Tank Dempsey, beneath his boisterous facade, grapples with the potential unseen wounds of trauma, his humor and aggression perhaps serving as a shield against a fractured past and a terrifying present. We've witnessed Nikolai Belinski's desperate retreat into the bottle, a stark illustration of the crushing cycle of addiction as he seeks to numb the pain of loss and the relentless horror surrounding him. Takeo Masaki, amid the chaos, clings to the unwavering principles of honor and duty, finding solace in the structure of a deeply ingrained code, a testament to the human need for meaning in the face of the absurd. And finally, we've peered into the fractured psyche of Dr. Edward Richtofen, a brilliant mind, warped by pre-existing tendencies and amplified by external forces. His descent into madness, mirroring the disorienting reality of schizophrenia. Though their methods of coping differ drastically, from outward bravado to internal escape, from rigid adherence to fractured perception, each of these characters offers a compelling, albeit fictional lens through which to examine the fundamental aspects of human psychology. Their struggles in the face of unimaginable horror highlight the diverse ways the mind attempts to protect itself, to find meaning, and to maintain a semblance of self when confronted with the unthinkable. Shi No Numa, the Swamp of Death, becomes a potent symbol, not just of physical peril, but of the profound and often tragic battle for mental survival in the apocalypse. This is Shi No Numa, where the dead rise and the minds of the living succumb.